folks, and welcome to our video lecture on basic design principles. Remember that this video lecture is in lieu of a face-to-face meeting on Wednesday, January 22nd. If you would like experience points for attendance and participation for Wednesday's class, you'll need to watch this lecture in its entirety, as well as complete the assignment that is discussed at the end and submit that assignment before class on Friday. Before we get into today's discussion topic, a couple of announcements and reminders. First, we will meet face-to-face on Friday, January 25th, so be in class ready to discuss power, politics, and really just human intent behind design. To best prepare for that discussion, be sure to read The Politics of the Interface, which is available on Blackboard. Also, remember that I will not be holding office hours on Wednesday afternoon. Rather, I have moved them to Thursday, January 24th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that is just for this week. After this week, office hours will go back to the time mentioned in the syllabus unless otherwise posted, or unless I say otherwise throughout the semester. All right, a brief review of last class. We practiced creating wireframes or wire sketches as we thought about and designed an app for WSU students. Now, those wireframes or wire sketches are essentially what you are going to be creating for Project One. Of course, for Project One, they will be done digitally and they will arguably be far more polished and will reflect another type of website or platform of your choosing. By doing so, we use those designs to help us talk through and define the steps and process of design thinking. Now, remember, with design thinking, even though there are specific steps and ways that we can understand how we effectively create specific designs, it's not necessarily linear. It's not just saying, okay, first I empathize, and the last thing that I do is I create a prototype and I test it. And then after I do that, I'm done. No. Remember that it's nonlinear and it's recursive. And so essentially, yeah, you start off with empathizing, thinking critically about who the users are, what kind of information they're going to need to fulfill or enact whatever the purpose of the site or platform is. But it's also saying, okay, well, if those designs don't work, how can I revisit specific parts of the design thinking process to improve upon whatever elements aren't working for my users? Also, in doing so, we discuss the importance of use and accessibility over aesthetics. Really, what this gets at, recall the Lady Gaga a picture of her in her heels. Yeah, they looked really cool and they were very unique. But when we think about them in terms of what shoes should do, and what the average person should be able to do in shoes, and that is walk and protect our feet. The shoes that she was wearing, they're not very accessible and they're not very usable. And so the same could be said for the designs that we create. Sure, you can have a web page that looks really cool and has a lot of bells and whistles on it, but if users do not know how to perform the function of the site or achieve the goal of whatever page they happen to be on and access the information that they seek, well, then what good is your cool design if the users can't make much of it? So that's why we want to really focus in on use and accessibility over aesthetics. So for today's lecture then, we are going to introduce terms for discussing design. We'll examine the intersection of design principles and we'll investigate the impacts of applying design principles. All right, so whenever I talk about design principles, I love opening up with this flyer. What's wrong with this flyer? Well, we look at it and, well, gosh, there's a lot. So we don't know what the emphasis really is. We don't know where to focus our eyes. We don't know what's important, or what the author or the designer of this flyer deems as the most important information. And we don't really know what content is related to what. Needless to say, this flyer is a mess. So what we're going to do today is we are going to become familiar with 4 terms that will help us assess and discuss, for example, what exactly is wrong with this flyer, but also help us understand how we can effectively create designs that value use and accessibility over aesthetic, but also while keeping aesthetic in mind, because you still, if you can, you still want your design to look good. You don't want it, of course, after you can make it functional, you can say, how can I make it look pretty or cool? But first we are going to talk about, okay, well, how can we create designs that clearly communicate the use of the site and the purpose, of whatever the site is, and how can we use design to do that? Okay, so these terms should already be familiar to you. You should have already come into contact with them by reading through the brief excerpt from Writer Designer, but it is worth exploring them in greater detail and talking about how we can see them on digital platforms. So when we think about the design principles, we can break them down into 4 key terms. And so contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. Throughout the rest of this unit, and honestly, I'll say throughout the rest of the semester, you will hear me refer to these either as the design principles or the CRAP principles. So if you hear me say, oh, okay, the CRAP principles, or how do we see CRAP enacted here, then please recognize that I am referring to these 4 terms that relate to the design principles. So let's look at each one of these in greater detail. So the first term that we want to look at will be contrast. Now, that's deliberately making one component of the design noticeably different from other similar components. It's used to draw attention to a specific part of the text, or in this case of the page or platform. Now, with contrast, it's important that it must be noticeably different. We can illustrate contrast in a number of ways, everything from size to format, to the type of the type of font that we use, to the colors that we use. Like, contrast can be created in a number of ways, but it just has to be noticeably different. So we look at these examples here. We can see in the first example of good contrast, the sizes are noticeably different. So as the user, our eyes are directed to the word good, and then we later will notice contrast. Whereas in the following example that says bad contrast, it honestly just looks like a mistake, like someone was going through and decided to make one word 12-point font and the other word 14-point font. And it looks more like an error, a design error, as opposed to a way of drawing attention to the word contrast over the word bad. We can also see it in terms of color as well. So with color, we can see with good contrast, we have good written in green and contrast written in blue. We have 2 very different colors that will allow the user to focus on one or over the other, depending on what we want to draw attention to. However, in the following example of bad contrast, we basically have 2 very similar shades of green. So it's not clear, again, it's not clear what our eyes as the user should be focusing on. So when we look at contrast online, this is just your regular WSU homepage here. So there are a number of ways in which contrast is created. So let's take a look here at Good Medicine, just this box right here. So the designers have created contrast by using a white font with a red background. We can also see that our eyes are being drawn to this particular text because it is in a red box rather than being transparent against the photo. If we just had the text over transparently laid over the photo, that white text would arguably get lost and it might be incredibly difficult to read. The contrast would not be there. So our eyes as the user of this site might not immediately go to where the designer intended. We can also see here how contrast is used between the titles and the text. So here, in this first box, we have steadfast support for our DACA students. That is written in red, whereas the rest of the text is written in black. So our eyes as the user are drawn to the titles here, and we can see that in each one of the links provided. We can also see here that contrast is represented through size as well. So again, we see that these headings are written with a larger font, whereas the text that follows are written with a smaller font. So again, we can see similar applications here. All right, now let's jump down to repetition. So when we talk about repetition, that is the repeating visual elements to create unity. It's often used to aid with platform navigation. So that's how I know perhaps that something is a link, or that something should be read as a heading, or that something should be understood in a certain way. Repetition, especially on digital platforms, is commonly demonstrated with font size, color, and style. So let's go back to the WSU page and see how they create repetition. So I will say that this is a perfect example of repetition, these boxes here, right? So let's just focus in on these 6 news boxes here. We have several different stories, but I know that this is the title for each. All the titles we can see here are written in red. They are written with the same font size and the same font type. Also, they immediately follow what we as the users can understand as categories. So each box, we'll even just break it down by box. We have land grant heritage. Okay, so that is the category that this story falls under. That is written in title case formatting, so all of the letters are capitalized, but it's still relatively smaller than the title itself. Then the title of the article is written in red, but is used in sentence case. So we see here, like the S is not capitalized, nor is the O or the S that follow. But we see that that pattern is repeated in each and every box. And then, of course, as we see here, we have a brief write-up or a brief summary of what the story looks at in greater detail. But that is present in each one of these boxes. So land grant heritage. And then we've got the title and the text. Human behavior is the category, title and the text. And we can also see that the box size does not vary. So even the box size is repetition demonstrated on a digital page. So we can also see that in other parts of the page as well. So we've got events here. All of the dates are written, an abbreviation of January, and then following the actual date. And then each one of these dates is written in a white text with a red box behind it. So again, we can see with information that they want to emphasize that at least down here when it comes to paying for education, that text white, it's written in white and then has a gray background. So we can see repetition enacted in different but still important ways on this web page. Okay, alignment. Alignment is one that doesn't get talked about as frequently, but it's still important, and we'll examine how we see alignment on the WSU page here in just a moment. So alignment is strategically placing text elements to demonstrate relationships and hierarchies on a platform. It can help with platform navigation. It can also help make an interface look cleaner and more organized. And it's important to remember that all placements should be, and more importantly, should look intentional. So going back to, especially as we focused in on contrast, our user should know that if something is aligned in a certain way, that it wasn't just a mistake, that we as the designers meant for that alignment to, or we meant for that content to be aligned in that way. So jumping back to the WSU web page here, when we look at alignment, we can start with just the basics, right? So we can tell that all of this content is left aligned. And so we know that this information should be followed in a certain way. I read this content first, so the category, and then I read the title, and then I read the text that follow. Now, when we scroll down here and we look at, let's look at this majors and minors. So, because in most Western cultures we read left to right, so that can help us understand how we should navigate this content. Because we can see that we have two we have content on both sides of the page here. We have this content here, discover hands-on learning, blah, 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 and then we also have the find my field of study or browse alphabetically. So we can arguably assume that this information of visit, inquire, apply, and the content regarding the different campuses is more important than find my field of study. Why? Because it is in the left column as opposed to the right. Remember, even on digital platforms, your users are likely still going to read from left to right as they would read any kind of printed material. So under majors and minors here, we immediately had the more important information immediately following. So discover hands-on learning opportunities in every major, explore WSU Pullman, visit, inquire, apply. And then we also in the right column here, we have find my field of study, graduate and professional programs. And we can sort of see this as supplementary information. So as you start to think about the content and the information that you're going to provide users in your redesign, think about, okay, well, what's most important and how can I use alignment to communicate sort of this hierarchy that's going on between all of the elements on this page. And finally, we have proximity. That is when we place related items close to one another. What proximity helps with is defining relationship between different texts and images. And with images, I'll also extend that out to say media. So if there's a video, an infographic, a GIF, a meme, whatever it is, it still applies to that as well. Proximity, what's great about it is that it can help reduce clutter as well, rather than having, things just haphazardly placed throughout the page. You can really compartmentalize content to help your users navigate the site and locate the information they need more quickly and effectively. So let's look at proximity and how it is applied here on this page. So this is a good example here for athletics, right? So we have Washington State Athletics. Purchase tickets, all sports schedule, WSUCougars.com. And then we have a photo to the right of a football player. So why is this good for a good demonstration or illustration of proximity? So As we have scrolled down this wsu.edu main page, we clearly have entered at least a section of this page that talks exclusively about athletics. So we have put in close proximity information that is relevant and important to athletics, such as, hey, how can I find information on getting tickets to a game? How do I know when the games are, and where can I find more information beyond this site regarding WSU athletics? Could you imagine for a moment if we had this purchase tickets link put, let's say, under here, under Explore WSU locations? It wouldn't make any sense, right? Because the proximity would be off. Even if you were to say, oh, hey, look, there's a link to purchase tickets to, the basketball game or, the track meet. Um, it might seem off-putting to say, well, okay, here's that link, but why isn't it down with athletics? Why is it in with information on finding a major or locating a campus that I could attend classes at? Also, you could think about it this way. Even though WSU is a big sports school, it might seem a little off to, let's say, with finances and paying for WSU to have a photo of a football player here, we're near scholarships and financial aid. However, because we have a photo of a football player next to content that discusses Washington State athletics, it makes more sense. So we can see how proximity really can help determine what kind of relationship exists between the different contents of a site or platform. All right. Now that we have discussed the CRAP principles in greater detail, here is what I would like you to do before we meet on Friday, January 24th in class. So I would like you to select a platform you're thinking about redesigning. You can take this as an opportunity to kind of explore what's out there, or if you already are sold on a specific platform, website, app, whatever the case may be, go for it. You can use that here as well. What I would like you to do then is I would like you to analyze how the page you are looking at applies the CRAP principles. Or I could also say does not employ each design principle that we've discussed. So what you will do is you will look at your website or your app and you will say, okay, Tinder's landing page, their homepage, applies contrast in this way. They do not apply repetition in this way. They apply alignment in this way, and they apply proximity in that way. So you are going to go through and look at how the site or app does or does not apply each design principle. Now, each principles write-up should be about 50 words. If you can bring it in around 40 to 60, that's a good word count to aim for on each. Also in your write-up, what I want you to do is I want you to discuss how the platform's applications of the CRAP principles does or does not help users achieve the platform's goal. And your critique on this should be approximately 75 words. Now, you could say, okay, well, Tinder uses contrast in this way, which helps users know, how to interact with the site of swiping left or swiping right. But because they do not use repetition very well, it can get really confusing, or users might get lost easily when trying to locate the contact information for people that they've matched with. So that's what your critique should, or your assessment should sound like. Now, you're going to submit your write-up as a .doc or a PDF to the appropriate assignment submission folder in the Assignment Submissions tab on Blackboard before class on Friday, January 24th. What this will really do is it will give me an idea of what websites or apps you all are looking at, and how we can sort of tailor our discussions from here on out in a way that's relevant to what you're working on for Project One. So if you have any questions or if there is content that I can further clarify, please do not hesitate to email me or stop by my office during office hours. All right, everyone, that is it for today's video lecture. I will see you all on Friday.